What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I want to talk about my thoughts and opinions on stats in Call of Duty, whether or not I find them to be important, and what improvements I feel could be made to the current stat system. Let's get into it. Alright, so I noticed last week my commentary talking about my opinions on Clan Wars was very well received for the most part, and it seemed like a lot of you guys really like to hear my thoughts and opinions on things, so I decided to make Thursdays my topic days for this channel. Well, sort of anyways. I'm still going to leave Thursdays as a break day if I need it, so don't expect a commentary every single Thursday, but when I do, I plan on talking about a topic that's either Call of Duty related, or maybe just gaming related in general. So today I'm going to be talking about stats in Call of Duty. For a lot of people, stats are very important. It's sort of how they prove, and I say the word prove really lightly here, that they're better than other people. Some people will even play for the sole reason of having a high kill-death ratio or a high win-loss ratio, so that they can show it off to their friends, or even just random people that they end up playing against. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to have this belief, and I think it can be kind of fun to have a little bit of a healthy rivalry among friends about your stats. I just feel that this sort of behavior is really unfounded, and we'll get into that more throughout the commentary. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the people that feel that stats are completely useless numbers and they don't represent skill at all, and these people tend to think that stats shouldn't even be a part of the game. I tend to lie somewhere in between those two extremes. I don't play with the specific intent to try and improve my stats, and I don't use my stats as bragging rights. Having said this, I feel that they can sometimes be used as a measure of a person's general skill level and playstyle, and they aren't completely useless numbers in my mind. So let's look at the main stats that people often talk or brag about. The big one is kill-death ratio. Now, I personally feel that kill-death ratio can give you a bit of an indication of skill level, but more so just when you see the extreme values here. So for instance, a player that would be considered to be a really good and solid player that can hold his own is not likely to have less than, let's say, a 0.5 kill-death ratio, unless there are some really odd factors going on. On the other end of things, a player that is not good at the game is not going to be able to maintain a 2+ kill-death ratio overall for a long period of time, no matter how hard he tries. So when I see a player with a 0.3 kill-death ratio, I can generally assume that that player isn't going to be much of a threat to me. On the other end, if I see a player with a 3 kill-death ratio, I've got a pretty good indication that I have to be prepared for an enemy that knows what they're doing. These are the extremes though, and even then they aren't 100% perfect indicators of a player's skill level. Kill-death ratio can be manipulated by way too many factors. The first one, and I see this one a lot with many of the higher kill-death ratio players, is they can leave games at the first sign of a challenge and then just search for an easier game. This obviously gives them an artificially inflated kill-death ratio. The second one is the game mode that you play will have an effect on your kill-death ratio to some degree. So for me personally, I tend to hold a very consistent 3 to 4 kill-death ratio when I play Team Deathmatch. But then when I go over to Domination, since I play the objective quite a bit, I'm typically more around the 2 to 3 kill-death ratio range on average. So the game mode does play a role here. Number 3, and this is a pretty big one, is your playstyle. If I wanted to play extremely defensively or camp, and not worry one bit about the objective, I'd be willing to bet that I could comfortably maintain a 5 kill-death ratio overall, even if this means that I'm only getting 5 kills and 1 death every game. This does not necessarily translate into skilled play in my opinion. Now the fourth big factor that can affect your kill-death ratio is your attitude toward the stat and the game in general. Sometimes a really good player will just like to screw around a lot and maybe go knife only a lot or try and troll people, and they really don't care how many times they die doing it, even if they are a really skilled player. If you do this enough, you can have a very serious impact on your kill-death ratio. So as you can see, just looking at kill-death ratio on its own, you can't get a perfect indication of a person's skill level. Sometimes you can get a general idea, but I wouldn't rely on it. Alright, so now let's move on to the next big stat, and that is win-loss ratio. This is a stat that, in my opinion, is an even less accurate indicator of skill than kill-death ratio. I'd even argue that in its current state in Ghosts, win-loss ratio is next to meaningless on its own. Why do I say this? Well, it's just skewed by way too many factors in this game. Number 1, playing in a party will obviously secure you far more wins than you would have as a solo player. A group of 6 average to below average players that play on a team and communicate with each other will almost always destroy any group of randoms, and they could likely go on a really massive win streak by doing this, which obviously will boost their win-loss ratio. Compare that to a highly skilled solo player that is constantly running into these organized teams all the time, and you'll see just how little win-loss ratio means as far as individual skill level goes. Moving on to the second factor, once again and to a greater extent, the game mode plays a massive role in skewing win-loss ratio. In the infected game mode, you'll win 99% of the games that you play. So as long as the infected win, which they almost always do in this game, you will get a win, even if you were the final survivor. So a 5-year-old that can barely even hold a controller could have a massive win-loss ratio if they just kept playing infected. Now the last big factor that skews win-loss ratio is backing out of games. While your win streak in Ghosts will not be ended if you leave a game early, you will still get a loss recorded on your stats, and this will obviously decrease your win-loss ratio. This is why you'll likely see a lot of those really high kill-death ratio with a low win-loss ratio players. These are the players that search for those easy lobbies and then they back out at the first sign of a challenge. Now, leaving lobbies doesn't necessarily mean you aren't a skilled player though. Oftentimes there are legitimate reasons where you need to leave, such as an unplayable connection, or maybe something in real life that happened and you have to deal with it. So that's why I think that leaving games is just another factor that artificially can skew your win-loss ratio. So these are the reasons why I consider this stat to be next to meaningless on its own as far as judging a person's skill level. With enough effort, you can basically set your win-loss ratio to whatever number you want with no skill at all. Okay, so finally I want to cover one more stat that isn't actually displayed in Ghosts, and that is score per minute. While Ghosts does have an average XP per game stat or something similar to that, I don't remember exactly what it is, it's just not the same as the score per minute stat in Black Ops 2. In my opinion, this was by far the most accurate stat for representing skill as long as you were looking at game mode specific score per minute rather than a person's overall score per minute, because each game mode had a much different range of score per minutes. This is a stat that was almost perfect for predicting what kind of a challenge you were going to be running into by looking at the game mode specific lobby leaderboard before your game. For domination, if you ran into somebody with a 400 plus score per minute, you knew that that player was going to be putting up a pretty good fight against you regardless of what his kill-death ratio was or his win-loss ratio was. On the other end of things, if a player had a 3 kill-death ratio but just a 100 score per minute in domination, you knew that it wasn't likely that he was going to be much of a threat to you because he'd probably just be camping at the back of a map. Now, I'm not saying that this stat can't be skewed either, it was just much harder to skew it, and most people didn't really have much interest in trying to artificially pad their score per minute, because it would typically require them to sacrifice their kill-death ratio, and a lot of people weren't willing to do that because kill-death ratio has always been the #1 thing that people go for. So it was generally an accurate stat. So overall, my thoughts on stats are that they often do mean something, but usually they should just be taken with a grain of salt. Personally, I never play with stats in mind, and I feel this is the best way to approach the game. Stats should be a reflection of your actual skill and your progression over time, rather than something you're actively trying to artificially skew for bragging rights. Also, on their own, stats shouldn't be relied on to judge the skill level of another player. Look at them all together and you may be able to get a very general indication of the type of player you're dealing with, but even then they often aren't very accurate. So now the big question, what would I do to improve the validity of the stats in Call of Duty? Well, first off, I would make every stat game mode specific, since every game mode has a different effect on the stats. And then if there is an overall stat page for a player, it should also display the percentage of time played in each one of the game modes so that you can get a better perspective on those stats. Number 2, I would create a new stat that calculates the percentage of games that you leave before finishing, rather than counting leaves as a loss towards your win-loss ratio. This could also be used for matchmaking purposes to discourage people from leaving, because they can match those people with really high leave percentages together and basically force them to deal with each other. And by doing that, you aren't going to be punishing the people that consistently stick out games with less than a full team. Number 3, I would create another new stat, and this one would calculate the average number of people that you play in a party with. This would be pretty easy for the game to calculate. All it would need to do is record the number of people in your party at the start of every single game, and then you just take the average of those numbers. Now, while this won't stop win-loss ratio from being skewed by partying up all the time, it will give a much better perspective when you are looking at win-loss ratio. So for instance, a player with an average party size of 5 and a win-loss ratio of 2 would not be nearly as impressive as a player with an average party size of like 1.5 and a win-loss ratio of 2. Moving on to number 4, score per minute should be included and also emphasized the most in my opinion. All of the leaderboards should be sorted by score per minute like they were in Black Ops 2. Number 5, display all of these stats together. This will make it so having a high kill death ratio won't be very impressive if your score per minute is right next to it and it's exceptionally low. It will kind of force some accountability on you to prevent you from trying to skew your stats. So finally, I would have an option for players to be able to opt out of displaying their stats to the public. Or maybe have an option so that only friends can see your stats if that's what you want. This would remove a lot of the stress and ridicule that people are often subjected to, and it may even improve the gameplay because people won't have to worry about camping or playing in another undesirable way to try and maintain a respectable kill-death ratio. This system, in my mind, would be a massive upgrade to the current stat system. I feel it would provide much more accurate stats and it would discourage people from actively trying to skew these stats, so I believe the overall gameplay would even improve. So what do you guys think of stats? Do stats mean a lot to you, or do they mean nothing at all? And what would you do to improve the current stat system or the stat system that I introduced? I'd love to see your guys' feedback and ideas. So that's going to wrap it up for today's topic. Now, I don't normally ask for people to share my videos, but if you could spread this one around a little bit, that would be amazing. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.